Mike with Motorrad Audio, and this video covers the installation of our Stage 2 audio upgrade package for the 2022 and newer BMW K1600s with the TFT screen. So let's get started. Okay, so we'll start with a quick unboxing of your kit. So in the box, you're going to have your 6.5-inch pods, which will come preloaded, pre-terminated, and ready to go for drop in there. With the speaker pods, there will be a small package that has some mounting pieces for installing those pods that'll be covered in the video. You'll have your 2-channel amplifier. It will already be mounted on its bracket, sealed up and tuned properly for your particular bike. On the amplifier, this is going to be your input section. Your wire harness that you're running in the front that'll be covered in the video will have color coordinated plugs for the input and the output, so your black will match the black and your white will match the white, so that'll be really straightforward when you get into that. You'll have a fuse holder package that has some other miscellaneous parts in it. So you'll have your fuse holder itself that's covered in the video. You'll have a couple packs of dielectric grease that are used for the connections on the amplifier that are not water sealed connections like some of the other pieces. You'll have your mounting bolt and speed clip for mounting the amplifier. You'll have a ring connector with heat shrink on it for the ground at the battery, and you'll have an Allen wrench that pertains to the fuse holder here. You'll have your main power and ground harness that you're running for the amp. You'll have your input-output T-harness that is for the speakers and the amplifier. You'll have some miscellaneous wire ties to help keep things clean behind the scenes. And you'll have a basic tuning sheet that just kind of gives you some information on the best settings for the radio and things like that. And a couple cards just in case the dealer's doing the install for you. We get a little advertisement in there to those guys. So the tools needed for installation of the kit are going to be a Phillips head screwdriver for dealing with the battery terminals, a T25 Torx screwdriver, as well as perhaps a shorter version or a right angle version for getting at a couple of the tight spaces. A set of wire strippers, wire crimpers for the battery terminal ring connectors, a 1/2-inch wrench, preferably a ratcheting style because it's going to be very tight quarters in mounting the amplifier, and that would really help. A set of flush cuts for a couple little trimmings behind the scenes. And then for the grill modifications behind the scenes, either a drill with a step bit that you can use for that, or a Dremel or something along those lines with a spiral end on it for cutting those holes as a secondary option. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started by removing the front grills and the LCD screen to get at our front pods. So first thing you wanna do is turn the key on. Go ahead and motorize your windshield up so you have access to these screws that are in the top. Once you have that up, go ahead and pop your top cover here. That way you go ahead and turn power back off to the bike, the windshield will stay up and you can access the top screws. One thing we definitely suggest for throughout the entire installation is find a place that you can put all of these parts that you take off of the bike that go with their associated screws, because there are going to be some screws that are varying lengths in various locations, and if your installation stretches out over a period of time, you may have a hard time remembering which screws went back in which location and which length. So it definitely helps to have somewhere that you can keep all that stuff isolated together. So the first thing we'll do is remove the top 4 screws here. There's going to be one right here, one here, and then the 2 that hold the top of the screen in. Once you have those 2 screws that are out of the middle there that hold the screen, you can go ahead and pop the screen top out and lift it right out. There will be 2 plugs here. One that is just a small plug that's pressure fit in there, it just pulls right out with no releases. The other is going to have release tabs that you squeeze to be able to work that plug out. Just be careful that you hold this good so it doesn't pop off when that plug lets go. So now your screen is out. You want to go ahead and set that to the side with those 2 screws. And then go ahead and remove the ones that are in the top portion of the grill here. Once you have those 2 out, go ahead and remove the two silver badges here. Go ahead and keep that screw in here with it. And now we'll move on to what we refer to as these little winglets on the side. So I'll take the camera off and give you a better view here. Okay, so our little wing here has a screw. It's right down buried in here. So that is still going to be the standard Torx that you need to remove there. So we'll go ahead and get that removed and I'll show you what's behind it. Same thing on the other side as well. Okay, so you loosen that up a significant amount and that actually releases this piece here. It does come up this way and I'll show you the rest of that mechanism here. So you'll see that screw that we just loosened way up right here. This just kind of goes in and puts pressure on a tab. So you don't really need to remove this screw completely, you just remove it a significant amount. And then you'll go ahead and remove these three screws that are holding this the rest of this cover on there. Again, same thing on the other side as well. So now that we have both wings off, our next couple locations are going to be this piece right down in here, which goes through this little plastic kind of corner cap, so to speak. Again, those are on both sides, and then also our two screws here, one on each side. So we'll get those out and then move on to the next step. Have this out, nice long screw that goes with it. And now that those little corner pieces are out, you'll see the final two screws that you have to remove, one here and one on the other side for taking these off. Screw can be a little difficult to get out because you really can't get your fingers down in there, so you may end up just kind of jarring it loose when you remove this grill. So the grill is snapped in with a couple snaps. You'll just want to pull it this way towards you. It usually breaks free a little bit dramatically, so just kind of keep yourself under control that you don't go flying backwards as you're pulling on it. There goes our screw that I couldn't get out. And now we have the grill out. And we'll go ahead and pull the other side while we're at it. Okay, so now that our covers are off, it'll be pretty obvious. There's three screws that hold the actual pods in on each side. You'll see the plug for the pod right here with a squeeze tab at the top of it that you squeeze to unplug that. So I'll have to put the camera down, go ahead and take these screws out and take these two pods out. This one here is another one where it's hard to get your fingers in there, so it may be easier to get that out with the pod all in one piece. Okay, so now that our pods are out, to make running the speaker wires to the pods easier, we're going to go ahead and move on to the amplifier section of it, to where we're pulling this side panel. So first things first, we'll want to remove the screws that hold this piece and these two here on. So most of them are pretty obvious. All of the screws in this panel. There are two that are longer than the other ones, so you do want to keep track of that. This is a very, very short screw that goes up here, so again, note that location. And you can also go ahead and pull this one down here that's at the tip of this other shroud that you uncovered when unscrewing the other. This does not have a screw in the other end. It just has this little rubber boot that kind of holds it up in there. So this comes right out. Your next screws related to this are going to be up under this front end. So I'll do something to kind of give you a shot of that. And then there is one more screw right here that you would need to remove while we're in this location. Okay, so under here, there's a screw right here above the light, and then another one right below the light that hold the rest of this side panel on. Now that we have those two lower screws out, you'll have one more that's right here underneath this. This does open up, as you may have noticed earlier. It hangs right here, but it does have an additional little extra section that it will go. Right here is a little plastic, I guess you could say a little plastic rivet, but there is a very small dot in the center of that. You're going to actually need to push that with a pick tool or something to that effect to release this. So we'll get into that here real quick and kind of go over the details of that. So with our little plastic rivet here, usually just take something like a pick tool, push right down on that center. Doesn't usually go all the way through to where you can get it out. So you do need to actually push that pin all the way out. Typically a paper clip works great for that. You'll hear it fall when you do that. With any luck, it'll hit the floor. Most often it hits the floor. If not, it should come off when you remove these panels, but you're definitely gonna have to keep your eyes open for it because it is a very, very small little cylinder of plastic. Once that has released and let go, this little top piece will pop right out with ease. Set that to the side and get your other screw out here. That is a fairly long screw, which is very different than all of the rest of the ones. And that is basically it. This panel will then pop off. The screw that I dropped earlier falls out, and you are ready to go for the amplifier portion. And just for a visual, the piece that pushed through and fell to the floor is basically that. So there's not a whole lot to that piece that you need for that center pin. So now that you have the side off and the speakers out, the next thing is going to be running the input-output harness that comes in the kit. So what that is this harness that's in the box. These two plugs are going down to the amplifier. They are the input and output of the amplifier for the front channels. You have these two here. These white plugs are the BMW plug that is included on the pod that you just removed. So these do plug right back into the factory plug that is in there right now. And this new plug is what's going to our new pod. So the shorter version, of course, is going to be right here closest to the amplifier. The longer end is going to reach across to the top. And I'll show you where these wires are supposed to go. So your amplifier, move this back in here. Your amplifier is going to be nestled right here between the brake system and the front with the bracket that holds it. So we'll get to that in just a second, but you're going to need your wires to shoot up in this area. So the easiest thing to do is grab your harness with these ends, and they will fish right down through here to that other side. So it's going to be fairly easy to feel your way through here once once I can put the camera down and kind of show you fishing that through. And then you'll have your shorter length of wires that will come in here. This will plug into the OEM. This will be there for the new pod. And then the longer one will run across and tuck behind here to the other side. So you'll just want to bring that through the channel here and kind of keep it out of the way of your pods as you do so. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. Okay, so you want to bring these two plugs down into this area. So you'll bring them in from the top. There's a couple different locations that you can run these through, so you don't have to be too terribly picky about where they're going there. It'll fish right down to here, so they're right there to plug into the amplifier. And these will be right here to plug into that speaker. All right, so we'll go ahead and plug that white OEM plug back into the OEM plug that we unplugged from earlier. And we'll take this end, route it up behind where the LCD screen would normally be. Bring it across here to the other side. Plug in our other side to the OEM plug as well. One other thing of note, when I ran the cable across earlier, I ran it in front of this cable, which kind of binds things up in here. So if you happen to have done that before you put your pod in, go ahead and bring the cable that's coming across behind this fabric wrapped one that goes to the screen. Just keeps everything freed up a little better back there. Okay, so for the amplifier portion, you're going to want to remove this panel and basically loosen this panel up for the routing of wires through here. So you'll be taking out this screw here and this screw here, and then up here you'll notice this screw in the front edge of that, and then another one right up here that's right by the handlebars. So we'll go ahead and get to removing those and move on to the next step. Now that you have those screws out, you'll need to remove this top cover. It does have one of the antennas to the system that is connected to it that you'll need to unplug, and you'll also need to cut a wire tie that is holding that plug in place. So take a set of wire cutters, snip your little wire tie that's down here holding that pink looking plug, squeeze the tab and unplug that, and this will come out. This is actually the FM antenna. I'm sure plenty of people know that these bikes don't have the greatest FM reception. That's all you got for an antenna, so that does definitely help contribute to that poor reception. Okay, so now that we have those screws out and this top piece popped off, you'll notice there is one more screw that is holding this top portion of this that's exposed. So you'll want to take that screw out as well. We're not fully removing this side panel and all of this stuff. We're just getting this a little bit loose to where we can get behind there, routing our wires up and through. Okay, so now it's time to drop our amplifier in. We have our input and output plugs here, but the amp is going to be mounted to this metal bracket right here. It used to be used for the horn in previous years. If you have a model that you bought this kit for and the horn is there, there is a hole on our bracket to remount that horn if you have to move it. So our bracket will nut and bolt to this and then rest on the ABS module on this end and wire tie here to mount the other end in place. So first things first, you're going to put this speed clip piece on that metal bracket. Just slide it right over the tip of it into place, and that's where the bolt is going to go through. The next part of mounting the amp or putting the bolt through there is definitely the most frustrating part of the entire install, so I apologize for that. Sometimes it drops in without too much effort, but most times it's quite the pain. You will need a 1/2-inch wrench, preferably one with a ratcheting end on it, because you can only get very small turns as you're putting this bolt in. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this camera and get to doing that. So one thing that does help is if you do have some WD-40 to put on the tip of this bolt, it will help that really heavy, hard, coarse thread slide through there a little bit easier. So first things first, we'll set our amplifier up into its position and then grab our bolt. I lucked out and that one dropped in relatively easy. So get to cranking this down. That's it. We're locked in there tight. This end is solid as can be. This end, you'll just take one wire tie right through this corner, right to this heavy bundle, and that'll keep that end from going anywhere, and it's resting right on this block. So you'll want to take a little dielectric grease, add some to the connector here, and then take your white matching plug. That's the input to the amplifier that you're plugging in. And then your front outputs of the amplifier, same thing, dielectric grease that. Sorry, shooting a previous video, I'd used up all my dielectric grease. So add some to your plug here. Plug these together. This wire will tuck up in here right between that portion of the gas tank. There is an extra hole in the bracket right here that is made for mounting these wires, so you can use a wire tie to tie this bundle up in here and keep that stuff secure. And then we'll work on the power wire end of it now. Okay, for running the power harness, we like to tape our power wires to one of the long wire ties, where you're taping one of the wires to begin with and then taper down to the end of the wire tie and tape it as it continues. We keep the wires separate because it makes it easier for pulling these things through without as much resistance. So we'll get to doing that. Again, right through this same opening here, you'll just fish your wire tie up through that hole, grab it on the other end, and pull your wires through. Once you get there, come back down, add your dielectric grease in here. And plug your plugs together. So you'll want to go ahead and tuck everything up in and go ahead and wire tie those into place down here where they're out of the way. That way, as you're running your power and ground the rest of the way and tucking everything, you don't cause any extra pulls down here that restrict where you want to actually tie these up. So we'll get those tied up and then we'll continue on with the path through here. Forgot, there is a wire harness right up here at the top with a plug that you can wire tie these to so they're not constantly trying to fall down on you. Once you're down here near the battery, you'll want to loop these wires underneath this really heavy wire harness that's there. That way they're not running over top of that and kind of a little more exposed, so to speak, visually, and make it in the way of bind up on the seat a little bit. So once you're all routed through there, you can put your bolts back into the bottom section here to hold this, and we'll deal with your power and ground. So now you have your power wire here. This is going to be leading to the fuse holder that we have supplied. So this will go up into the fuse holder as shown in our separate video, and then connecting and then drop down into this pocket as a safe place to store it. But first things first, we'll start with our ground wire. You're going to want to cut that to length to whatever you feel is proper. Give you a little bit of wiggle room in here for future servicing, that sort of thing. Strip back and expose the end of it. Give it a twist. Take the ring connector that was supplied. Slide the boot down over the wire and crimp your connector on. Give it a tug, make sure it's got a good crimp. Slide the sheet back over it, and you're ready to make that connection. So all you need there is a Phillips head screwdriver. And our ground is done. So for the power, you're going to be pulling this back, popping the cover off here. You have an Allen wrench that was supplied with it to loosen up the screw for the empty hole here. And loosen that up for your wire to go in. Strip about a ½ inch worth of wire because there is a lot of space up in there. So I just want to maximize the wire contact with the fuse holder. Probably use a better set of strippers than what I have here because these are not doing so great. Once you have that, once again, give it a twist. Poke it through the rubber seal here at the bottom. And bring it up into the fuse holder itself. Crank that Allen head down on it pretty good. And slide this boot back up in it to seal that up watertight. Snap the cap back on, and you are ready to go. You drop this down in here, connect it to the battery, and away you go. So I'll leave that disconnected for now, but that'll be the final step once everything is hooked up and you have your speakers installed. Okay, so moving back to the front speakers here, we're going to need to remove this bracket on each side of the bike to make room for those 6.5 inch speakers. So you're going to need to remove those two screws right there and the one up top here. So the one up top is going to be a little harder to get at. A shorter screwdriver or a right angle is going to be handy there. And these do typically come torqued in there pretty solid compared to most, so it will take a little more elbow grease to break them loose, but they will come out without too much of a problem. So we'll get to doing that on both sides. Okay, so now that those two brackets are out, there's going to be a couple little minor modifications to make behind the scenes. One is going to be this antenna connector here. You're going to want to clip this wire tie to free that up and get that wire tie out of there, because our new speaker is going to be right up to the edge of this. It barely fits. So this you'll need to bring up and wire tie out of the way so you have plenty of clearance for the speaker going down in there. And then on the other side, you're going to have this plug right here behind this panel that is going to be in the way of the new pod going in. So you'll need to get this plug off of this little plastic tab and then cut this plastic tab off so the speaker pod can tuck up in there. So we'll try and get you an after shot of that. It's going to be something that's hard to get at in video, but this plug will come loose and then be tucked up here out of the way so it doesn't interfere with the pod. And then the plastic tab that it's mounted on, you're going to be cutting off with a pair of snips or any other type of tool you may have to do it. Okay, so you can see now, pop that plug off and then tucked it up into this cavity here. So this is the plug right there, still serviceable and all, just tucked in a little more behind the screen. And so now you're just going to be snipping off this little plastic tab that's there. It doesn't have any structure for anything. It was really just a place to mount that wire harness. So you just need to cut that piece flush off. Okay, so for this side, we're going to start with a couple steps. You have our double-ended threaded rod here that was included in with the speakers. That's going to go in the middle of these 3 screw mounts that you took that bracket out. So the one that's in the middle towards the front, you'll screw that into. Try and screw it down as good as you can. It does start to grip after a while, but that's going to be a guiding stud for the pod that's going in. You'll want to remove this piece here and take the speed clip that we included in the package and slide that over here for the new screw to go into. Just gives you more wiggle room and more ability to actually get the pod mounted. Make sure that your antenna cable that you unplugged earlier has not fallen back in here somewhere. You don't want to put the pod in and not have access to that, so make sure you have that up here where you can get at it. And then grab your left side pod, which will be the one with the tab pointing this way towards me. Plug that in. Make sure these plugs are tucked back in here as good as you can, because again, this pod is a very, very, very tight fit. So there's not a lot of room for anything to get in the way of the pod going in. So there's a hole on the end of the pod here. It's got a good amount of extra wiggle to it to help you guide it in. But you're basically going to put this end in first and guide that hole onto that stud that we just put in, and then rotate the speaker pod in, and that's basically it. You're in place. It's going to be very, very close to the cone on the front, but it does indeed clear when the speakers are playing, that sort of thing. So take one of those inch stinger screws that we included, drop that in here, and then grab your Phillips head to tighten that back down. And that pod is installed. It's in there. It's certainly not going anywhere. So we'll move over to the other side, because that one was a little bit different than this side. So over here, we have our tab cut off that we talked about earlier. You want to screw the stud into that same location. So this front middle location here. You'll want to remove this panel. This is something we missed in the previous removal portions. So you'll be taking this screw out and just moving this back a little bit so you have some room to work with your pod going in here. Same thing, remove that clip there and install our new clip onto there. I'm having a very hard time doing at this angle while holding the camera, so I apologize for that. So that clip is installed there. And I'll get this panel removed real quick and we'll drop our pod in. So once you have that panel disconnected and moved back, you'll notice this is your AM antenna that is plugged into in the same scenario as the other side. You have your AM antenna portion there. So just get this tucked out of the way. You can certainly snip that wire tie and take it and unplug it completely out if you don't feel right about leaving it connected for the moment. But it just gives you some extra room to wiggle that 6.5-inch pod in. Okay, so same scenario here. Reach down in and grab the plug that you previously ran, previously ran. Plug that in, make sure it's tucked way down in there and none of the cables are in the way. Locate that slotted portion there. Drop it onto that stud and rotate and push the speaker in. Again, very, very tight. Portion of that tab that's cut off is actually touching against the speaker basket itself, but it's not actually hitting the cone of it. So grab your Phillips head screwdriver and screw that we supplied. Tighten that down and you're good to go. You can slide this panel back into place that we've popped off and put your screws back into it there. And the front speakers are in. We're not going to do reassembly on it right now because we have a lot of other things to do to this bike, but reassembly will be in the reverse order of how you disassembled it, so it should be pretty straightforward. Before putting everything back together, we do suggest popping your screen on, just loosely snap it on here, power everything up, make sure everything is good to go before you reassemble this stuff here. All right, so this is Mike with Motorrad Audio showing how to do the grill modification that you would do when you're installing our 6.5-inch pods. This isn't required, but if you notice the opening here is not really very large because they're anticipating that small little speaker of theirs getting clearance. So it definitely helps if you open up some of these channels through here. You'll want to do that with a Dremel or a drill. The example I'll show you in a little bit was using a drill on it just because we assume most people would have like a step bit or something along those lines to do it with. If you're handy with a Dremel, you can open it up even more and a little more neatly. The main thing is that you're going to want to leave these ribs in here because this fabric, as you'll see later, is basically just held on by this. So you don't want that drooping down on you later by over modifying this and kind of giving it that space to move as heat softens up the adhesive or what have you over time. So we'll get to disassembling this. There's a couple Torx screws here, and there are a couple Torx screws here that you'll need to remove. You do want to pay attention to these because these two are slightly shorter than these two. So you want to make sure you put them back in the right place. I'm not sure if you put a longer screw in here, if it may perhaps dimple out the other side by accident or something along those lines. So we'll get to it. And by the way, this is a T20 bit. So once you have those taken out, you'll see some tabs floating around in here. There's a plastic tab here and another plastic tab there. If you push, or actually 3 of them, there's another one along these down on this end. So you want to push these tabs to release this grill away from it. You'll have to do a little bit of massaging to kind of get that apart as you go along through here. Once that pops loose, you can set this to the side, and now you'll have this, which is the grill assembly to the front end there. So what holds this together is basically the grill goes through a whole bunch of slots here, so you'll need to bend these tabs up as you go around to be able to release that front section. So you can use a flathead screwdriver or whatever kind of tool you've got. Some of you may just be able to do it with your fingers, depending on how tough your skin is, that kind of thing. And you'll have this, we'll bend these up here real quick. And this is a plastic piece that will basically pull out from underneath the edge. There's a little tab here that kind of holds it down, and that comes off. That's the one that goes with your short screws. Once you have all these bent up, you'll just kind of want to slowly work your way around the grill. Try to be gentle with it. Try to work with it as much as you can. You don't want to be too rough and accidentally bend part of the grill or something and change the good cosmetic of the bike. So just be patient as you go around. I'd done the other side grill and didn't remember this was here. So you do have your latching assembly here. So you will need to remove this screw as well to kind of get clearance in there to take that off. You won't have that on the other side. And there's one more tab behind there that's kind of keeping that all from coming apart. So once you have this apart, you'll notice that this grill is completely perforated. There's no blockage of any kind when it comes to the grill itself. So the main thing is, again, this carpet, I'm not sure if it's adhered on here or how it's adhered on here, so you don't want to cut too much of that away so this can droop on you later. But the good part is, since it's completely blocking the entire grill, any modification that you're going to make to this is going to be completely invisible to the eye once it's reassembled. So you don't have to worry about changing the look of the bike. It'll look completely factory. So now that you've got that apart, you kind of see what we're working with here. What we have here is the one that we had already done kind of testing this out. So you'll see where in between each of these squares, we drilled with a step drill down to kind of open that up, but then didn't really trim out the excess. Again, if you have a Dremel and you're handy with it or something along those lines, you could open these squares up even more. Just leave the structure there. We were doing a bunch of testing in actually replacing the front badge assembly that's on there with something that's maybe perforated and lasered out. That may be an upgrade that we offer down the road for people that don't feel the tweeter is loud enough. So we had cut this portion out in doing that testing. When you're doing this one, assuming you're not going to be doing that modification, then just leave this intact. There's no real reason to cut this out. This does block the tweeter that's going in there, but thankfully the tweeters that come in the Infinity Kappas, the Hertz, and the Rockford versions, they are quite aggressive tweeters because they're designed for Harley and loud noise and everything else. So typically, even with this blockage, you still get plenty of treble out of it. But if you really want it screeching your head off, you could cut this out and we could supply you with a lasered badge that has perforation in it, but it kind of changes the look of the bike a little bit. So that's going to be your preference there. But basically just go through and drill as many holes as you're comfortable drilling. This side where there's no latch assembly, can't do as, we could do more if we wanted to. Not sure if that would really accomplish anything, but you know, you wouldn't be able to do it on this side because of the latch for the little flap up top. So drill a couple holes there, a couple holes here that you can kind of squeeze in, a couple there, and that just opens up everything to let that sound come through better. And then once you reassemble it, it'll look just like it came that way from the factory, but you'll be getting a lot more output out of your speakers.